We
Oh,
click go live. Okay.
okay. Looks like you're ready.
Ready?
Okay. And we have some latency, so don't pay attention to that. Ready? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Renaissance Men podcast. I'm Michael Perilla.
And I am Vishal Shah.
And this is the first ever episode of the Weekly Review, a series that we will be performing every Sunday in which we will be discussing news stories that have occurred throughout the past week and giving our opinions on them.
The goal is to try to break down a small number of topics with as much detail as we can, and also just to discuss the various different opinions that we're hearing about them.
Yeah, and so one of the first stories that we want to talk about is in regards to immigration. So earlier this year, one of the laws that President Trump passed is being dubbed the Migrant Protection Protocol, MPPP. It's also nicknamed as the Remain in Mexico policy. And essentially what it does is it changes a prior protocol in which we would allow people who were applying for asylum in our country from staying in our country while waiting to be processed for their asylum. So instead, as is evident in the nickname, the Remain in Mexico policy, instead of allowing them to stay in our country, what we do is we send them back to Mexico, if that is where they came from, to await their asylum claims being processed. Now, it's been a little controversial, but I actually think that it is a good policy. Number one, because people use our asylum laws and protocols all the time to get to apply for asylum and then not wait to be processed and then stay in the country because they are allowed to stay in the country while waiting to be processed. And applying for asylum does take a long time, which is part of the problem. There are 800,000 backed up asylum cases that have yet to be processed. And of the asylum cases that are processed, about 50 to 60% of them end up getting denied. In other words, they are not accepted as legitimate refugees or asylum seekers. And this is important because I feel like we should go over what actually qualifies someone to be a legitimate asylum seeker, because I think that there's a lot of confusion around this.
And correct. So we have the definition, the legal definition of a refugee seeker. And if you'd like to go into that.
So a refugee is, and this is according to international law, a person with well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence that has been a result of any of those factors. So essentially what this means is that if you are leaving a country that is war-torn or is economically downtrodden, you don't simply get to claim asylum because the country that you're leaving is in turmoil. You actually have to be persecuted. You have to yourself be persecuted because of your race, your religion, your nationality, of some characteristic that is out of your control. Now, political opinion is a little bit different, but political opinions are protected, at least in our country, and so we try to enforce those internationally as well by allowing people who are fleeing their countries from persecution of their political opinions to come here. But essentially, this is really important because it means that simply coming into the country because you are looking for better opportunities in the country does not allow you to be a refugee. And a lot of people who are claiming refugee status or seeking asylum are in fact economic migrants, meaning that they don't qualify for refugee status, which is really important. Now, whether or not you agree that that should be what qualifies someone to be refugee status is another question. I think it's something we should talk about, because when we talk about illegal immigration, and this is actually important because a lot of people who try to cross the border illegally then apply for asylum. They apply for asylum after having crossed the border illegally. This is this is where we start to get into the difference between affirmative asylum claims and defensive asylum claims.
Right, right.
Because there's a difference. When you make an affirmative asylum claim, you come to a port of entry, and then you claim asylum as soon as you try to enter the country. Whereas when you make a defensive asylum claim, usually that is because you have been arrested or detained for some crime, whether or not it is the crime of crossing the border illegally, which is a crime. So you can be detained for that. You could also be detained for something else, like, petty theft or anything really, and then you can try and make a defensive asylum claim so that you aren't deported, because people who are in the country illegally who commit crimes are usually deported because of that.
Right, right.
So they try to make defensive asylum claims so that they can stay in the country.
I would like to point out, so this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is part of an ongoing issue that we've been seeing long before the Trump presidency. Immigration has been an ongoing issue.
Absolutely. In fact, there's some interesting immigration numbers. So there are migrant crises all over the world. There's a migrant crisis in Europe, and we're dealing with one as well. And the numbers have been increasing, right? So I've looked at some of the data from the CBP, and virtually every single month of this year, we have seen double the amount of illegal border crossings into our country than we did last year. So roughly most months last year, about 50,000 people would cross our borders illegally, and these are the people who are caught. These aren't even all of the people who make it.
Which is still a huge number, I'd like to point out. Like 50,000 people a month is pretty enormous.
Yeah. This year, however, it's been roughly 100,000 a month. So we have pretty much doubled the number of people coming into our country illegally. And I know that I do want to point out that this is important, because I feel like a lot of people nowadays don't understand why it is important to enforce our borders, and there are a variety of reasons, most of which fall under one of two umbrellas, and that is either economics or national security.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty surprising. Even to this day, we have presidential candidates and politicians alike making the claim that that under their authority, anyone would be allowed to come into the country. People who are big name individuals, people who are running for president, who disregard the idea of border security or some type of regulation on the number of people immigrating to your country. So this is a serious issue, and I mean, if you'd like, we can even break down the fact that this is an issue and why it's an issue. Yeah,
we can, and I think let's talk about the national security issue first. So enforcing your borders is really important. Number one, especially for the United States, because there are terrorists who try to sneak into our country all the time. And while most terrorist organizations do not have access to nuclear weapons, they can get access to dirty bombs. And it is fairly easy to do so. And dirty bombs are very powerful. Now, they're not nuclear weapons per se. They're more like traditional bombs, but they leave behind a lot of radiation that affects the area outside of their blast zone. And that's also very dangerous.
So for anyone who's unfamiliar with dirty bombs, they are laced with cobalt and will create an environment that is radioactive for hundreds, I believe thousands of years. I'm not an expert, but many of these materials that become radioactive with this type of weaponry will stay that way for a long time, rendering an entire area unlivable for incredibly consistent amount of time. We do want to double check on some questions here from the viewers.
No, I'm just seeing what's going on.
Okay. We do want to mention here. So part of why we like doing this live and want to do this live is because we want to hear questions.
Yeah.
I think we could both agree, many of the topics we'll discuss are things that we find only bits of information being provided by major media sources, and we honestly, it feels like there's a bit of an information vacuum where the things that the average person wants and needs to know, they don't get access to from the news. They don't have time to watch TV and watch news channels for that. So we understand this has become a much more popular and in a lot of ways easier source for information for a lot of people. We want people to understand these topics better, right? We want you to be able to build your own opinions. So ask your questions. Please ask away, and we'll be more than
Absolutely.
happy to address those.
We'll probably
If
get to
not
that
today, then
at
potentially
the end, if possible.
Right.
But for now, continuing with immigration. So we've
Right.
gone over a little bit of the national security issues, and it's really important to enforce the borders. Dirty bombs are only one element. I mean, any group of militants could try and come across the border if they're unpoliced and wreak any amount of violence on people. So that's absolutely something that we need to take into account. But then there's also the economic side, which I also think is just as important, if not more important. It really depends on your point of view. But allowing unlimited numbers of people into the country does hurt the economy. And immigration itself doesn't hurt the economy. It's all dependent on how many people are coming at the same time. Because you can take in millions of people if you spread them out over a long enough period of time, because the economy has enough time to acclimate to all of these people. But if you inject a massive population into a society all at once, then the resources don't exist for those people.
Right.
And those resources can be any number of things. Housing, one of the most important ones.
And those people, regardless of where they're from, tend to clump up in the same place. I mean, if America is the melting pot, then you can think that the pieces in the melting pot need to be bite-sized, right? And that if you wouldn't just throw a whole onion into a soup and expect it to dissolve well, you're going to find a ball of onion by the end of it. And that's kind of it's a similar issue that we see with immigration, where we'll find so many immigrants come from one place that, not that they don't try to assimilate, I'm sure that many of these people do, but they might find that it's easier for them to just become part of a pocket community of people from a similar place. And now you have an entire group of people that doesn't assimilate. And diversity of culture is all well and good, but in order for diversity of culture to even be effective, that diversity needs to be brought to the other side.
Yeah, well,
and that doesn't happen in those closed-off communities.
There are definitely cultural impacts of mass immigration, and that's important too. But one of the things that I think is a big impact of immigration is also the increase of the labor pool, and this matters because when you have a ratio, you always have a ratio of employers to employees, and when you have more employees as opposed to and less employers, then the employees are the ones who have to compete for positions, which means that they end up getting paid less because there's always going to be someone who can simply fill that position at a lower cost, and so it disadvantages the employees because there's more competition for them, versus when there are more employers and there are less employees, the employers have to compete for the employees, because if they are unable to find employees, then those positions don't get filled and they're not able to get the work done that they need. So they have to offer more to the employees. So having a lower labor pool results in higher wages. And this is actually really important because there is data that shows that the vast majority of people that are coming into our country, especially illegally, are low-skill workers, which means that the wages of low-skill workers are going to be diminished, especially when people who are coming into the country illegally tend to work off the books. So they can get paid lower than minimum wage, and they usually don't pay taxes. Now, some of them do. Many of them don't. But all of this to say that the impact of immigration, especially the kind of immigration that we are dealing with, does hurt people's wages. And even if I'm not even going the they took our jobs route, because that's not even what I'm talking about here. Even if you have a job, the chances are that the value of your job is going to be lowered because of the increase of the labor pool, and that matters just as much.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, there's a similar perspective on the minimum wage, and what you cited is almost the supply and demand of the worker-employee relationship. And sorry, I don't mean to get off topic, but something that just kind of hovered on my mind that you had mentioned a little bit about. So a lot of the people coming in through Mexico, you had mentioned, we looked at some statistics citing that many of these immigrants are coming from Congo, Uganda, China. So just going back to the
Actually,
terror threat, because this is something that
most of our asylum seekers are from China, about 22%.
22. So that's incredibly,
Yeah,
a significant portion,
they're the biggest
right?
block.
So I just wanted to point this out because there's the perception that a terror threat is, not a perception by many, not by all, I should say, that a terror threat is something that's not legitimate, that we shouldn't really be concerned over, something like that, the national security side of this argument. But if somebody from, say, China or Congo wants to come into the United States and can illegally through the Mexican border and have, and we're seeing this quite a lot specifically with people from Congo, who's to say somebody with malintent couldn't come into our country through the Mexican border? And where would it be easiest to do so if they wanted to come into the country? I mean, people are still a threat. Let's not forget. I mean, if 1,000 or 100 people come through the border with some type of aggressive or malintent, they can do something with that. And we talked about 50,000 people the most recent month, 100,000 people coming into this country illegally. So there's a serious threat here. And I just wanted to point that out. I know that was a little bit off topic, but I don't think people realize that the sheer strength of 100,000 people, or half of that, a quarter of that, whatever fraction of that coming into this country illegally with bad intentions. That is not to say that people coming in today, that a majority of these people have bad intentions. I'm not claiming that at all. But we do need to be very, very wary of that.
Yeah, and I mean, we're always under threat of attack, especially from more guerrilla groups. I think it's unlikely that a nation would attack us because that would essentially be a declaration of war.
I'd agree.
But it's much more likely that groups that are unaffiliated with countries will. And I mean, we've done a lot to combat terrorism, but it's not something that you do once and then it goes away. There will always be people lurking in the shadows. I mean, there's been talk of ISIS potentially resurging because of Trump's actions in Syria. There's not a ton of evidence for that, especially given that he's just executed 2 of their most prominent leaders. But even with that, if we were to completely leave these terrorists alone and we were to completely leave our borders unguarded, eventually they would reform and then they would mount some sort of attack. It's inevitable that would happen.
Yeah.
So we do need to be vigilant, and maintaining the security of our borders is one of, if not the most important thing that we need to do in order to prevent attacks on our country. So border enforcement is absolutely necessary. And this isn't even getting into the creation of the wall. I do think a wall is important. I think it's important to explain why. And anyone who is in law enforcement will tell you that barriers are important to preserving any territory. Now,
just because you can break out of a prison doesn't mean it's a bad idea to send a criminal to prison.
Yeah.
Right? And the same logic. Just because somebody can illegally cross a border doesn't mean you shouldn't put one there. And sorry, continue.
No, yeah. And the other thing is that I do want to emphasize that the wall isn't the be all end all. Right? The wall is not going to end all illegal immigration, and I don't think that anyone who's a proponent of the wall thinks that it is going to. Which is why I find it weird that I see a lot of arguments saying that the wall won't end all the illegal immigration, because I don't think anyone actually thinks that it does.
Additionally, it is quite the straw man.
Yeah. Additionally, in addition to the wall, I know I just said additionally twice, being redundant, but
we're human beings.
Yeah. You need people to patrol the wall, and I think that the most effective thing to do would be to, you build the wall, but you have cameras watching every inch of that wall, and you post stations at certain markers along the wall, and it's their job to monitor a certain section of wall. Because they have the cameras, once they see that someone is trying to climb over the wall or cut through the wall, people have been trying to cut through the portions of the wall that Trump has been building. Once they try to do that, then you send out your patrol, and then they can be stopped. Because the wall by itself isn't going to stop them. What the wall does is it slows them down. It forces them to have to overcome the wall in some manner, which gives our border enforcement time to react to them. That's why the wall is important.
Right. I mean, and like you said, it's not an end all be all.
Yes.
Nobody who's in support of border security is saying that that's going to be the end all be all. But yet we constantly see that as the counter argument that, oh, if you build a 10-foot wall, well, somebody will just get an 11-foot ladder.
Mm-hmm.
But I would rather force somebody who's trying, I mean, if somebody is trying to break the law and come into the country illegally, I would rather that they have to haul a 12-foot ladder with them than for them to not have to haul a 12-foot ladder.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty reasonable statement.
Yeah, I mean,
The
it
idea that
increases.
there are countermeasures. I mean, there are countermeasures to anything. If you try to combat crime one way, crime will adapt another way, and that's something that's been an issue since crime has been an established fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this idea that, oh, well, a border wall won't stop everything, so let's just throw the idea out together. Now, here's what I will say. I don't know that a wall specifically is the ideal border security solution. However, I will default to my lack of knowledge on the topic and say that experts would agree, and that I personally think that we should have border security.
There is data
in whatever
that
way,
shows
shape, or form that
when you erect barriers, I mean, we talk about a wall. I mean, a wall could be anything. It could be made of anything. It could be the steel slats. It could be made of stone. It could be a fence. The point is that barriers are effective.
Yeah.
And there is data to show this, that when you erect barriers along the border, because certain parts of our borders have barriers and certain parts don't, and data shows that in areas where borders have been erected, where barriers have been erected, that they reduce the amount of illegal crossings immensely. So they do work, and the only way to ensure that our entire border is protected is to increase the amount of barriers that we have. Now, sure, there are some natural barriers that you can't build wall on, like mountains and rivers, but those are things that we can build around and work around. It's not a it's not a all or nothing deal.
And to be clear, for no country has that really ever been like, rarely throughout history have we ever seen a leader say, you know what, I don't care that there's a natural barrier here, build right through it. Any sensible leader will say, we'll build around it, use that area to our advantage. If it's an area that we have difficulty building on, or that's difficult to traverse, use that to our advantage.
Yeah.
So we keep finding straw man arguments to this, and honestly, I'm still kind of baffled to the motivation.
Well, I think that the motivation
I
think the motivation mostly stems from anti-Trump sentiment. And there has been a lot of anti-Trump sentiment, and I think that this segues really well into our next topic, which is the impeachment of Donald Trump. Because a lot of people are against the wall simply because they're against anything that Trump wants to do. And this is exemplified no better than the media, who have been trying to impeach him since before he was elected for things for crimes that are not crimes and are not impeachable offenses, because they are not crimes.
And just to be clear, if they were crimes, then you would get arrested for them.
Yeah, and many I've seen some articles arguing that Trump should be impeached for offhand remarks that he's made, which is that you can't impeach a president for that. You actually have to have evidence that they committed a criminal act that is a high crime or a misdemeanor, treason, fraud, etc. You have to have evidence that they've committed these. Yeah. So
right here we have the requirements, or typically like the stages taken before impeachment is something that's followed through with. So first off, a member of the House of Representatives brings a resolution of impeachment, or in some form or another, an inquiry. Now, the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, would need to produce a majority vote to be able to advance that resolution to the full House. Then the House would need to have a vote and would have to get a majority vote to continue with the impeachment resolution. Then the Senate would need to act as the jury, judging the president and the impeachment resolution, and with a 2/3 majority vote would have to vote to convict.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with all of that said here, I want to point one thing out specifically, is that we have a Republican Senate. We have a Republican majority in the Senate.
Yes.
So assuming that all the first three steps here that we'd mentioned are completed, there's still no guarantee whatsoever that impeachment is something that is continued with, and that Trump will be removed from office.
It's unlikely that he will be.
It is highly unlikely.
But I would also like to mention that this week, and the reason that we're talking about impeachment this week, the Democrats have voted to formalize their impeachment inquiry, which is not the beginning of an impeachment process. It is not a resolution of impeachment. If they had voted on a resolution of impeachment, this would then go to the Senate. Rather, what they are doing, or rather what they have done, is that they have voted to formally continue the investigation that they have been enacting informally previously. And there has been a lot of controversy surrounding closed-door investigations that the Democrats have been conducting. Now, there have been Republicans present for these closed-door meetings, but according to reports, they have largely been unable, or rather blocked, by Democrats from cross-examining witnesses that they have had in these meetings. And they've also not allowed the president's legal counsel to be present for these proceedings, which they should be present because these accusations are against the president. Even if he's not there himself, he should have a representative, someone who's representing him legally there.
He does. I mean, of course, this isn't a fully fledged court case yet, but if it was, he would have the right to an attorney.
Yeah.
He would have the right to counsel. So,
yes.
If this is something, if we're trying to set the standard, if Democrats are trying to set the standard that this should be a criminal investigation, then I think they should be upholding that same standard by providing evidence.
Yeah.
Now though this was.
They are going to have to start doing that now that they have formally voted for an inquiry, but it is a little bit ironic that they only decided to do this once enough commotion was made about the fact that they were doing it privately. Like, they're going to do it publicly now, which I think is a good thing, but they should have been doing that from the start.
And so the politics of this kind of gets intertwined here as well, because I believe there was only maybe 2 or 3 Democrats that voted not to continue with the formalization of this inquiry, right? But so this was largely voted down partisan lines. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train there a little bit. I wanted to point out some of the the constitutional process, clarification, whatever you want to call it, for impeachment specifically, because there is a little bit of gray area to this as well that the Senate will be involved with.
Right.
So Article 1, Section 2 states, the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. Article 1, Section 3 states, the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. So the Senate would have to, like we said, a Republican Senate would have to try Trump and convict him on the grounds of impeachment. But additionally, and as we have here, Article 2, Section 4 states, the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, there is pretty clear gray area there. Yeah, right?
I mean, the question of what constitutes
a high crime, what constitutes a misdemeanor.
Exactly.
And then of course
this has been debated for over 100 years.
Especially even regarding treason.
Yes.
I mean, there have been accusations of treason towards Trump since 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, if you go online right now, just do a simple Google search, impeachment 2016, you'll find articles entertaining the idea of impeachment of Donald Trump before he was even president. So I don't think it's unfair for the average person to say that they have some skepticism regarding the claims of impeachment. We've been hearing this in the U.S. now for three and a half years.
It's the boy who cried wolf. They've been attacking Trump too aggressively, and it makes their attacks on him now uncredible.
Doth protest too much.
Yeah, exactly. But
and look, we're all for a due process. Yeah. I mean, if the man is guilty of anything there that constitutes that he should be impeached, impeach him. And, I'm all for upholding the systems that we voted by.
Yeah.
But there is a serious concern that if this president is wrongfully impeached in some way, shape, or form, that the public unrest from that could spiral, to say the least.
It would also set a dangerous precedent for the future in which
Yeah.
the legislature would be able to remove a president for any reason if he's wrongfully impeached.
What it'll do to our culture, what it'll do to our sense of safety and security.
Yeah.
Um,
What it will do
yeah.
to people's faith in the legal system, because the faith in the legal system is really important to upholding a society. If people do not have faith that the laws are going to be followed and upheld, then they have no reason to obey them. Especially, and there is a lot of corruption in our legal system. People are already losing faith in our legal system. Any further decay of it is only going to result in chaos. And that's something that I don't think anybody wants, which is why we need to make sure that our politicians are upholding the law even when they don't like it. Even, if Trump,
Especially when
if Trump is not guilty, they should not, if they find him not guilty, they should not continue pursuing him. And unfortunately, as we have seen, they've been pursuing him relentlessly from one issue to the next. First it was Russia, then it was racism, then it was Ukraine. I mean, now it's Ukraine. And actually, I think we should talk about how this whole impeachment process even started with Trump's conversation with the Ukrainian president.
Sure. So
Because essentially what happened was Trump had a call with the Ukrainian president in which he remarked somewhat offhandedly that he would like to see an investigation into Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election.
correct me if I'm wrong. These transcripts were released.
Yes, although they aren't transcripts per se, rather they are a written recollection of what was said by the people there. There isn't an official transcript because nobody was writing down what they were saying as they were saying it.
Okay. Okay.
So it is technically not a transcript, but it is the closest thing to a record we're going to get outside of a straight up recording of the call coming out.
Which I can only imagine the level of president we'd have to be if we were pulling calls from world leaders to verify what they said because we didn't trust them. I mean, that would be a dangerous circumstance in itself.
Well, if we were to do that, it would also it would make it difficult for any world leader to trust that their conversations with the president of the United States would be kept in confidentiality, which would greatly reduce the likelihood that foreign leaders would share information with the president.
Greatly reduces our negotiating power.
Yes.
Which Trump has been able to exercise pretty well from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Now, two other things I want to touch on regarding the impeachment inquiry. So there's been talk of a whistleblower. We've recently information's been released showing essentially the whistleblower for this person who claimed that the conversation between Trump and the leader there with Ukraine specifically was to target Joe Biden, and because he's a presidential candidate, that there would be, conflict of interest there.
Well, that is one of the elements of why they've used this as a justification for impeachment. But the other side of it is that they are arguing that Trump had withheld aid from Ukraine as a incentive for Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, and their argument is that Joe Biden is a political rival of his. Withholding aid from a foreign country to investigate him is corruption. Now, the problem with this argument is that we withhold aid from countries all of the time as a negotiation tactic to get them to do what we want them to do. And so what they have to prove, it's not enough for them to prove that Trump withheld aid from Ukraine, because the evidence is pretty clear that he did. They have to be able to prove why he did it. And as Trump's justification for this is that he was doing it so that they would investigate interference in the 2016 election, not even necessarily Joe Biden. It just happened. Like, his argument is that Joe Biden just happens to have connections with Ukraine, given number one, his son's involvement with Ukrainian businesses, and number two, the fact that he was the point man on dealing with Ukrainian corruption when he was vice president. And in a lot of ways, what people are accusing Trump of doing here is the exact same thing that Joe Biden has been accused of. Not the exact same thing, but similar, because he said that actually it is the exact same thing. It's not even similar. He said that Ukraine would not get their money if they did not fire a certain prosecutor who was investigating Joe Biden's son for corruption. He demanded that it be done that day. It's not even like he had a call with them and said, hey, stop, fire this prosecutor, and think about it. He said, I'm going to leave Ukraine in 6 hours. I want this done in 6 hours, or you're not getting the money. That's what he said. That's a lot more aggressive than what Trump said.
Just to add to this, Joe Biden also claimed that at no point throughout his presidency did he discuss any of his foreign policies or proceedings with his son, and also claimed that nothing regarding Ukrainian business or any just this, like you had mentioned, inquiry regarding corruption and Joe Biden's immediate tasks in Ukraine. Those were the only things that he had any involvement with, that his son had absolutely nothing to do with it, while at the same time being on video, or I think on camera with him, his son, and 3 CEOs in Ukrainian businesses. So I don't want to make a clear accusation there. I don't want to.
Yeah, we can't prove anything, but I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't have discussed anything having to do with Ukraine with his son, even once. But
it's also odd that his son is an executive in a Ukrainian business. But
but
we can. That's something that can be dissected later.
Having said all of that, Joe Biden's defense of these accusations is that he was sent to Ukraine to root out corruption, and part of his rooting out corruption was trying to get this prosecutor fired. Now, whether or not you think that that is true or not is sort of irrelevant, because that defense is the exact same defense that Trump is using here. He is saying that he has asked Ukraine to investigate corruption and interference in our elections. Joe Biden is ancillary to that. Now, in fact, I'm fairly certain that from the transcripts that have been released, that Trump didn't even bring up Joe Biden. I'm pretty sure that the Ukrainian president himself brought it up. And
I did hear that as well.
Yeah. So there is no.
We can fact check that. Of course, we encourage the viewers to as well.
Yeah. But there is no evidence, or maybe I could be wrong, but from what I recall, there is no evidence that Trump was going after Biden directly. Now, this is in stark contrast to Biden's situation, right? Maybe you think that prosecutor was corrupt. Maybe Joe Biden was justified in doing it, but he was very aggressive in his desire to see this one prosecutor fired. And this is one prosecutor, right? Like, I could understand wanting certain changes and withholding money, but it seems to me like a disproportionate response to demand a prosecutor be fired within 6 hours, and to threaten the withholding of billions of dollars, or millions or billions of dollars, if that's not done. That to me is far more egregious than anything Trump has been accused of.
Now, that having been said, I don't think this is an accusation for or against Trump or Biden, right? But there are some clear parallels. Like, regardless of where you stand on who's right and who's wrong, what you believe, there are some clear parallels there that you have to keep into account. Mm-hmm. Because let's say you believe that Joe Biden went there for all the right reasons and did all the right things, but if you could acknowledge that the circumstances surrounding his situation and comparing that to the circumstances surrounding Trump, there are there's some clear similarities there that I think have to be taken into account. And upon reviewing those similarities, I think you have to treat them with similar standards. What dictates guilt, what evidence is required. I don't think that those pieces of information have been collected from Trump to be able to provide
I should point out that there isn't enough evidence to convict either one of these accusations. You can say that it looks bad for them. You know, I would say that it doesn't look. I would say that it looks worse for Biden. But even having that been said, there's still not a lot of evidence to show that he wasn't engaged in his duty of trying to root out corruption. In the same way that there isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that Trump wasn't specifically targeting Biden, rather that he was trying to investigate Ukrainian interference in our elections. And I find it somewhat ironic that he is being attacked for trying to do that, given how much of a fuss has been made about Russian interference in our elections. If we're going to investigate interference in our elections, we should investigate it from all sources that it comes from. And the fact of the matter is,
phenomenal point.
The fact of the matter is, our elections are interfered with by foreign countries, just in the same way that we interfere in the elections of foreign countries, and other countries interfere in the elections of other foreign countries. Other countries are constantly trying to influence one another for their own gain. And so we do have to be vigilant for interference in our elections, and that means from all sources, Russia and Ukraine. And if people who were going after Trump over Russian interference in our elections should... If they had consistent ideals, they should be pleased that he was asking Ukraine to investigate how they interfered in our elections. But instead, they're not.
A claim of interference that Trump's opponents very strongly have touted and believe. I mean, you have a lot of people on the left who want to claim that there were interferences with Russia meddling in our election in very specific ways, by the way. You know, I mean, being involved in another country is one thing. We're hearing claims that the Russian government had bots set up on Facebook, Google, YouTube, and that they were posting fake information, that they were providing misinformation to the masses, and that's how so many people were lulled into voting for Trump. The thing is, and please, anyone in the comments, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen any of it. I've never actually seen fake news from a Russian bot.
Here's the thing. I mean, the fake news issue, you know, is real, but the irony is that the source of fake news is not really bots. I mean,
it's not really Russia.
Fake news is everywhere.
Yeah,
lots of our media companies, lots of our U.S. media companies peddle fake news all the time. Major media outlets, and you know, sometimes they won't even correct it, and when they do, they will usually do it quietly.
I think, you know, it's actually part of why I feel like there's such a strange irony to this, is that you have major media sources saying, like you said, touting information that is inaccurate. I mean, we can post sources for this as well. I can name at least 2 cases right off the bat where major media sources sprang right to misinformation. I think the Covington Catholic High School case is probably the crystal clearest example. I think Jesse Smollett is also a good example of this, and how the media will be so quick to post information that they haven't verified, and they have the ability to verify it.
Yeah,
they had, when CNN posted the video about Covington, they had access to the video, the entire full video that showed exactly what happened, exactly when,
and
who walked up to
who. And the only reason they corrected their record was because people were outraged at the misinformation that they were promoting. It's only when there is a backlash that they feel the need to actually roll back what they've said. And even when they do that, again, it's done quietly, right? What they'll do is they'll post a headline, a very incendiary headline, and then, you know, they'll have their article saying whatever it is, and after that headline has been passed around, then they'll correct it. And there have been there's data that shows that these corrections are often seen far fewer than the initial release of the articles.
The topics just aren't
the
as
misinformation
attractive.
Spreads, and the correction is seen by almost no one.
I mean, anyone wants to read a juicy article about impeachment and scandals and all that, but as soon as you see something providing counter arguments, well, that's not very exciting to a lot of people, so they step away from that. And of course, you know, keep in mind, there are also advertisers are a huge part of this as well. the reason that clickbait exists is because advertisers will gravitate towards things that are clickbait because people will click on them and see an advertisement.
Exactly. Well,
so
they want those clicks.
So something that's gimmicky and clickbait designed is it's more profitable for advertisers. They're more likely to spread that information.
That is the incentive structure of our media ecosystem right now.
Yeah, and so if you have something that is honest and factual and not that exciting, well, as true as it might be, the number of people that will see it is probably going to be far fewer than the people who hear some exciting and surprising lie.
Yeah, it reminds me of this old saying that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has enough time to put its pants on, and it's the truth. Lies
spread fast.
Lies fly around like nobody's business, and people, especially today, I'm not sure if it's that people don't care about the truth or if they just don't have a strong enough desire to search for it, because it is out there. If you really wanted to find it, you could, but it isn't always easy. You do have to spend time and energy actually researching and looking into issues in order to figure out what is real and what is not. And a lot of people just don't have the patience for that. And I don't blame them. I mean, everybody has things going on in their lives. The reason we have news entities is because these people are supposed to be the people that we trust to do the research, the people we trust to spend the time and the energy figuring out the truth and then sharing it with the world.
Even just doing the research that we do, so we know firsthand how hard it is to find credible information. And it's not because there isn't enough information. It's because there's so much information.
It gets buried.
So much of it contradicts itself. So much of it is from groups with special interests or incentives to post certain things a certain way.
Yep.
So you can find an article supporting anything. I mean, you can type in an article right now saying the Earth is actually flat, and you'll find somebody who tries to.
Flat Earth of the society is growing, man.
And I'm just saying, you'll find somebody with a straight face who will tell you that that's the truth. And look, I mean, I'm not going to call it a convincing argument, but they'll try to be convincing, and some people will call it that. So at this point, if you do have, we have a wave of, we have an ocean of clickbait.
Yeah, and
surrounding
misinformation.
And misinformation and clickbait's lies just filling our internet.
Yeah, and that's why, at least I believe that the idea that Russian misinformation is what turned the election is
kind of laughable.
Unlikely. I mean, highly unlikely at the very least.
This is my opinion, but honestly, I think it's kind of laughable.
There is another element to where what role Russia may have played in our election interference, and that has to do with WikiLeaks, because there is some evidence to suggest that the emails that WikiLeaks posted from the DNC servers were provided to WikiLeaks by Russia, or at the very least that Russia was the entity that hacked into the servers, and then that information got disseminated, which WikiLeaks eventually posted. It's unclear as to what exactly the supply chain is, whether or not WikiLeaks was directly coordinating with Russia or not. But there is strong enough evidence to suggest that Russia is the one that was responsible for hacking into their servers. Now
I want to ask you a question regarding this. Because
real quick though, the thing about this is that no one has ever disputed that anything that was posted by WikiLeaks from those servers was misinformation. And the fact is that it's not. All of that information was real, and all of that information was damaging enough to Hillary that she lost. And that might not have even been the only reason that she lost, right? There are lots of criticisms of the kind of campaign that she run.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Those emails did implicate that the DNC had in some way targeted Bernie.
Yeah, they not just the DNC, but media entities working in coordination with the DNC. There were emails showing that debate questions had been provided to Hillary Clinton prior to the debates, and they weren't provided to any other candidates like Bernie Sanders, who was her main competition in that race. So they did a lot to cheat Bernie out of that election. Now, whether or not you think Bernie would have won regardless of that, that's a whole different question. The evidence is there that they were conspiring against him.
Yeah.
And that is real information. It's not fake news. It's not. And so you can't use that as an argument to say that Russia used that to spread misinformation, because they spread just information. It's just information.
I want to ask you a question because Mike is a little bit more tech savvy than myself. Now, is it agreeable and clear that the Russian government had interference in hacking those emails, or are we just sure that some type of Russian entity, a Russian person, a Russian IP address? Like, do we have a? Can we say for certain?
I can't say for certain. I would have to look more into it. I would love to spend an entire show talking about just that, because you could really delve deep into that, and there are ways to set up proxies that make it look like you are, trying to hack into something from a different location. So it is possible that an entity not even from Russia hacked into the servers and then made it look like they were from Russia. But to my knowledge, there is some evidence to suggest that the Russian government itself may have been involved. Again, I can't say anything for certain. I would have to look more into it. But it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. It is within Russia, and more specifically Vladimir Putin's interest, to destabilize our nation. So if they could do anything to gin up separation in our country, then he would absolutely do that. So,
and then I guess the follow-up question, which this goes right back into what you had mentioned prior. Mm-hmm. If it is the case that the Russians and the Russian government did interfere with the election, if we've had every major media source for at least 3 years try to claim that is the fact, that this definitely happened in a very specific way, then why would it be unfavorable for Trump to try to look into that further, figure out who was doing what, to actually try to inquire about this so-called interference? That to me is in kind of, it shows the double standard, right? If this was anybody else looking into this in a very specific way so they could try to learn more information about the Russian collusion or interference, any other person in government who would have been doing that would have been praised for it. But because it's Trump, because it's based around him, because we believe that he's the perpetrator of all of this, that's actually unpopular. So, I mean, what should he do? Like, if you were Trump, are you supposed to inquire and find out about who tried to make this, who tried to spread misinformation, leak emails, etc.? Are you going to try to investigate that and get criticized for it because apparently you shouldn't be investigating it? Or do you not investigate it, in which case people criticize you for ignoring it?
Well, I
don't think there's really a winning answer
I think that's the dilemma that Trump is sort of stuck in regards to every move he makes. Because at this point, it almost doesn't matter what he does, he will be criticized for it. And, you can criticize the president, but I think that we should do so in good faith. And when you attack him for every single thing he does, even when what he is doing is a good thing, then it disincentivizes him to listen to any of his critics, which makes it more difficult to correct him when he actually does make bad moves. And so that's something that it's a disservice to the whole country, in my opinion, especially with the kind of person that Trump is. When you attack him in this way, it makes it much less likely that he will listen to you, and much more likely that he will do the opposite of what you want him to do out of spite.
I'm sure anyone here can think back to a specific time in grade school where you were in the right. One other thing regarding the media. So everyone's thinking about this next election. Of course, I am too. Mm-hmm. Where are we going to see this media escalation head to next? Because if Trump wins, we can only imagine that the smear campaign and the Trump phobia is going to get worse. And if a Democrat wins, honestly, I'm a little concerned as to where the media will head with that.
Mm.
If we have a media that's doing all of this and is supporting candidates on the left, and look, I'm pretty far left on a lot of topics. I think that there's a serious concern for the stability of our political structure.
Yeah.
We're at a position right now where we see media lie more than in a more influential way than we've ever seen it before.
At the very
media has
least,
more
I
influence
think that
now
there
in some ways
is.
than ever before.
At the very least, I think that that it's more obvious, right?
I mean,
There-
running a
there's
newspaper
been,
company used to not be very profitable. Like, their media companies now are incredibly. I mean, not as of the past few years, but they've historically been rather profitable. Like we said, there's clickbait. There are multiple things that large news sources can use to make excessive amounts of money doing what they do. Continuing with journalism. I mean, I'll leave it to you from there. I think I've pretty much spoken my mind as far as, what we're seeing with media right now is only second to really.
Well, that's part of why we're doing what we're doing, is because we want to be able to, I mean, we give our opinions on a lot of things, but we also want to make sure that we're putting out accurate information. And
yeah,
we're always willing to admit when we may be wrong about something, and. We try to do as much research as we can before we talk on the subject, but obviously, you can't get access to every piece of information. So if anyone shows us any piece of information that contradicts anything that we say, then we're always open to seeing that. That being said, I would like to answer some of these questions, because I noticed two questions from our viewers. And they're very related questions in regards to the Democrat presidential candidates. One of the questions is, who, in our opinion, do we think would be the best Democrat candidate? And this is interesting. It's a hard question for me to answer, because I'm not shy about this. I'm not particularly fond of any of them. I will say that probably of all of them, I would go for Tulsi Gabbard, if only for her stances on foreign policy. In terms of domestic policy, I don't like really any of their policies. I think that they all want to increase spending and the federal government too much, but Tulsi seems to be the most moderate of all of them, and also the most open. The rest of them, I believe, are a little bit too partisan.
I would agree there.
And so I would say Tulsi Gabbard for me. Who do you?
I like Tulsi Gabbard. I also do like Andrew Yang, and there are definitely a few things that I strongly disagree with him on. Very skeptical of UBI. I like who Andrew Yang is as a personality.
I would
as
love to spend
individual.
a whole episode talking about UBI one day.
Sure, absolutely. Regarding Andrew Yang, I think that he's got the type of forward thinking that I would see in somebody who's open-minded. He looks like somebody who will be willing to work in a bipartisan way. Now, there are some candidates that clearly will not do that. I don't think Kamala Harris is. I mean, as long as we're talking about the picks that we like, and those are probably the two best ones there.
The other question was, who do we think the worst candidate is? Which we can
Fantastic.
Get into that. Yeah. So,
all right.
That is actually, I think, a more difficult question to answer than the first one.
It's a more entertaining one in some ways. There is so much to poke fun at.
Yeah.
We can start with. Well, why don't I start off with Bernie, right?
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. Although I'm actually not 100% if he is the worst, and this is where I might disagree with you slightly, because I actually think that it could be Andrew Yang. Although I want to like him, I think that his policies would actually be the worst, if only because he wants to do pretty much everything Bernie wants to do and more in regards to UBI. But they're pretty much all for Medicare for all. They all want healthcare for everyone. I'm not 100% on whether or not Bernie has, or on what stance Bernie has on immigration, but I know many of them want to essentially decriminalize illegal crossings, meaning that people coming across the country illegally would not be detained effectively creating an open borders policy?
There are some people farther left, specifically like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who think that illegal immigrants should have the right to vote as well. And there's like a very, very clear conflict of interest right there. Yeah. You're not only letting people come into the country illegally, now you're not going to arrest them for it, and you're going to let them vote. And who do you think they're going to vote for?
Well,
they're going to vote for the people who are going to let them stay illegally.
They want to give them the right to vote. They also want to give them free health care as well. They want to extend all social benefits to everyone who comes in illegally, and they want to let in as many people come in illegally as they want, which, as we've stated before, there are economic downsides to that. There are also national security risks to that. So there are a lot of reasons why that is a bad idea. And it's hard to say who exactly is the worst, because for the most part, they all tend to agree. There are some moderates in the party, but of those who are of the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even Andrew Yang class, they all tend to agree on these issues for the most part.
So some important distinctions I will make about just some of these candidates. So Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are, I believe, the only two candidates running that would like to abolish private health care. So under their universal healthcare system, you would not have your private healthcare provider. Bernie's been pretty honest about that, very straightforward in Bernie Sanders fashion. He's not going to sugarcoat much of what he says. And Elizabeth Warren's been very, very different on that. I think she lost a lot of respect.
Bernie is much more honest in what he wants to do than she is.
Well, he's more honest, but he's also less fearful in a lot of ways. Like Bernie does not seem to put it this way. He doesn't mind a picture with a bad hair day. Okay, so Bernie is willing to get his hands a little bit dirtier. It seems he's willing to be a little bit more.
Very similar to Trump in some ways.
Well, they had the same.
I think a debate between them would be very interesting.
I wouldn't call him as bombastic as Trump, but he's got that same.
He's got that energy.
Energy, right? Yeah. So I wanted to point that out about those two candidates specifically. Actually, adding on to that, their wealth tax is something we can mention. So one of the reasons I feel
like we're going into all their policies.
I promise I'll try to not make it too long, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can go for days about this, but going into really just like the main the key points that were I think the Achilles heel of some of these campaigns, and I think Bernie's and Warren's will be their healthcare plan as well as this wealth tax. Now, there's a clear issue with a wealth tax. Let's assume you have let's say you have $2 million in wealth, right? The businesses you own, the properties you own, etc., and you earn $100,000 a year. So if I put some type of wealth tax on your $2 million, one of two things happens. You either can afford to spend from that tax out of your income, essentially meaning that your income goes towards that, so you're not really making money. Perhaps you're making money, assuming the wealth tax is low enough, but I would doubt that. I mean, right now we're looking at projections that would essentially have the people at the top 1% losing 95% of their income that they would make in that year.
There are a variety of plans. This is another thing that I would love to talk about, and another thing that we could spend a whole episode talking about.
We probably should spend a whole episode talking about this.
I do want to move on to the next question, which is, do you think President Trump will be reelected, and if so, why? And this is a complicated question. Well, I mean, it's a simple question. I think the simple answer is yes.
Right.
I think he will be reelected. But why he will be reelected, that's a lot more complex. Mostly, I think that he will be reelected because right now it seems that the majority of the energy in the Democrat Party is with the far left wing. That being said, Joe Biden is the front runner in the election. But once those numbers start to get whittled down and the far left energy gets behind one candidate, whether that's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, I think they might actually have enough to beat him in a primary. And actually, Joe Biden's numbers in some of these early states, like in Iowa, don't look that great. And one of the big arguments that is made for Joe Biden is that he is arguably the most electable candidate. So if he starts losing states in primaries, it's going to do a lot to hurt faith in his campaign.
Yeah.
And if he ends up not getting the nomination and we end up getting a further left candidate, I think a lot of people will end up voting for Trump. A lot of moderates will end up voting for Trump because I just don't think that there is that much support for these more far left agendas that they are promoting.
And keep in mind also something to about 40% of people don't vote. So that's something that you can add to part of that. I think Trump will win as well. And if I gave a short explanation as to why, maybe just 3 one-sentence answers, people don't want a politician right off the bat. That no one wants to vote for an establishment politician, corruption and all that. Nobody wants to vote for anyone who's already in the political landscape. So that'd be my first. My second would be that
Andrew Yang has the best chance to beat him.
Which is, I would agree. He's a businessman, and his views seem to be the most marketable in a lot of ways.
He's also very personable.
Probably
the most personable. Even though I disagree with a lot of his policies, like I've said before, I really want to like the guy.
Well, so
I really do.
Personability does matter to some degree.
Yeah.
Because is he going to seek out the approval of people that don't approve of him already? I think the answer is yes. With somebody like Trump, the answer is more like a no, right? Trump doesn't seem to be trying to get approval from people that don't like him.
Yeah. Well, that's virtually impossible is the other thing.
That is, well, but agreed. I'll concede that. But he also doesn't seem to be trying that hard to turn people to his side, right? Andrew Yang seems like somebody who would be better at that. The math pin that he wears, I think that he's somebody with where sensibility and common sense is at the core. I think that if he sees that on paper his policies will not work, I think that he'll abandon those policies.
Yeah, I think that he's
because he's not a politician.
I think that he's certainly reasonable enough to listen to criticism.
Is he reasonable enough to say that he was wrong? Because we think some of his policies won't work.
Yeah.
And
I think it really depends on how you present the argument to him, and I'm not sure how many counter arguments he has heard to some of his policies, but I definitely think that he is someone who could be convinced, and that's important.
Yeah, that is incredibly important. I mean, you can look at somebody like Kamala Harris. She does not want to be convinced. She's already had her wallet convince her, so she's well checked on that. Doesn't have to worry about being convinced. Another probably. My opinion, that one of the worst candidates that we could get. Actually, at least Bernie and Elizabeth Warren have a heart.
Yeah.
I mean, Kamala Harris is. Here's the question they should be asking: Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris? Which would you vote for?
That's when you put it in that light, it's like really bad, man.
That's it gives you some perspective. Like, whoa. Don't compare her to Hillary because they look way too similar.
Yeah.
They both look like they have every line rehearsed. They're both incredibly polished, long-standing politicians.
A little bit awkward when they try to make jokes.
Yeah, you can clearly see that their smiles and idiosyncrasies are fake. Kind of like Cory Booker. You can tell that him always doing this and keeping his eyes super. He
tries too hard.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's the thing. I mean, if we're really going to talk about the people who have the best chance of beating Trump, I think it's.
How about
Andrew
the ones
Yang.
that aren't trying to manipulate us? That might be a good start, right? So we'll scratch off Cory Booker.
Getting spicy there.
I mean, look, we're talking about politics.
We are.
And there is a fine line between acting a certain way and presenting yourself a certain way because you think that's how you should conduct yourself. I see that as standards. It's totally different when you're one person and try to market yourself as a totally different one because you know that it'll pull certain strings.
That's actually one of the reasons why...
That's manipulation.
That's one of the reasons why I respect Bernie despite how much I disagree with him because he's very authentic. He has been saying and arguing for the same things for decades. So you know that he believes in what he's saying. Regardless of whether you think he's right or wrong, you know that he actually stands for something, which is something you can't say for a lot of the people on that stage.
Just because I mentioned that I was going to give 3 points there. Things are working under Trump. That's one reason people will vote for him, and I think that he'll win, right? Just it's simple enough. People see things that are working. They don't pay attention to politics at all, but things are working, so they vote for the same guy. They're those people. People don't want a politician. And especially minorities in this country, have learned to notice when politicians are trying to pander to us.
Mm-hmm.
We've
It's
gotten
actually
good at that.
it's actually ironic because Kamala Harris does not have a lot of black support, and Joe Biden has the most.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
because
you can
make
argue
of that
why
what you
that
will,
is,
right? Yeah.
But people are the pandering game doesn't work as well as I think some of these politicians think that it does.
Yeah.
People can see through the empty promises.
I have coworkers, very close friends, people that I've lived with who are trans. I'm bisexual myself. Kamala Harris getting on stage and saying my pronouns are her and hers. It doesn't help anyone. That's not a contribution to the trans society. That doesn't help anybody. You didn't contribute anything to anyone. You just made it very clear that you have certain views. It's virtue signaling.
It is. You know?
And so I see something like that, and I don't see somebody who seeks to support me and protect my rights. I see somebody who wants my vote. And that to me is offensive. That to me, that's, a lot of minorities have had this mentality. We've seen politician after politician. Communities have seen politicians pass for 20, 30 years and have become totally numb to the idea of a new politician. Red and blue looks the exact same to a lot of these people. But the one thing they notice is when somebody is genuine and when they're not.
Yeah. And
that's what somebody will always see through the end of it. That's why Hillary didn't win. That's why I think Kamala won't win.
Yeah.
It's part of why Beto dropped out. And I mean, we could talk about how he'd probably be one of the. Beto might actually been the answer to that. He might have been the absolute worst candidate.
If he were still in the race, I would have said.
If he was still in the race, because he's the only one that was almost guaranteed to start a civil war. Trying to send police officers to people's houses and have them take. Their guns, confiscate guns.
He openly said that he would do that, and that's not going to fly in a lot of states.
Frankly, he probably lost a lot of support from members of the law enforcement community for that.
I don't think he ever had that much support from them to begin with.
If he had any to begin with, proportionately, it must have dropped. I mean, what law enforcement officer wants to be tasked to go home to home to tell people that you have to give your guns up to me?
Well, there are a lot of law enforcement officers who probably would refuse. And
refuse, yeah.
For example, in Colorado, they try to do pretty much the exact same thing. And there are several counties in Colorado that are gun sanctuary zones where the police will not enforce the gun restrictions and confiscation laws that they've tried to pass there. Yeah. So even if they try to pass these laws confiscating guns, it's very likely that many law enforcement jurisdictions would refuse to enforce those laws. So he would have to send federal agents to accomplish this, and that's only going to cause way more tension. Absolutely.
Yeah. And now what happens when members of a community who are in law enforcement, but they're members of this community, seeing other members of their community getting stripped of their arms? Do you think they're going to stand for it? Do you think the community is going to expect their local police to let that fly? And do you think the local police will? Because at that point, you could have disagreement. I would hesitate to say conflict. I'd hope not, right? Fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But there could definitely be some disagreement between law enforcement and federal agents there.
Well, fortunately, Beto has dropped out, so this is not going to happen unless other people try and take up his cause. Although, we should get to this last question, and I think this is going to be the last question that we answer, and we'll end the stream. Someone asked, do we think Trump has a heart?
It's a good question. It's actually, I mean, it's not necessarily politically relevant, but I think a candidate's character matters. Well, I don't like Trump's character often enough.
My instinct is to answer this question sarcastically and say that if he didn't, he would be dead. But I understand where you're coming from with this question. I think you're asking if he's empathetic or if he's caring, and I think that he is. It's just that Trump is very combative, and that is the side that we see of him the most because he's constantly under attack. But I have seen many instances in which Trump has displayed genuine caring for other people.
A lot of people have compared Trump to a stern father. That's often been like the comparison made because he's not going to sugarcoat your mistakes, and he doesn't. He'll tell you you messed up, kick you in the boot, and tell you to get back up and continue on and fix it. And he might,
He might not say it in the best way.
Might not say it in the best way, but he does it because he cares. Yeah. Now, that's not, I'm not saying that that's exactly who Trump is, but a lot of people see that, and that's what a lot of people...
That's the vibe they get from him.
And a lot of people are attracted to that.
Yeah.
They get this sense that he's a strong figure, almost a paternal figure for a lot of people. So that's definitely, that we want to talk about if he has a heart. A lot of people are, would say yes. He's just not expressive about.
He's not as articulate as he could be, and that does work against him.
Well, it's easy to look like you have a heart when you say that you care about a certain group of people, but people don't. You don't perceive that the same way when you're talking about your care for an issue. Like Trump says that he cares about illegal immigration and stopping, the situation on our border. People hear that and think, okay, so he cares about his objective and whatever. But I don't think that they understand that is also caring for people. Like the people who are sent across the border often get hurt along their way. And if they get hurt in this country, in the United States, they might not want to go to law enforcement because they're in this country. There are a lot of complications to that. You're not making anyone's life easier by letting them into a country illegally. You're not giving them a good life by forcing them to live a life of crime. This doesn't help anyone. So empathy is something that you see very clearly when people talk about people, but not when they talk about issues. Trump talking about how we need to be more independent as a country, him producing tariffs and changing the international environment to benefit the United States. Some people will see that and say that's proof he doesn't care about people, and other people will say no, that's proof that he cares about me
as an American
more than other people. He cares about me because we're his people. We voted for him. Yeah, he's our leader. You want your leader to care about you more than other people. But,
This goes a little bit into the conflict between the ideas of nation states and empires, which is that's a whole thing that we could really go into. And that's a very philosophical discussion about what the role of our country should be in the world.
Right.
And also an argument over what is realistic. And that's something that we simply do not have the time to go into.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a whole segment on its own.
Yeah.
But that having been said, we did mention it is time to wrap this up. And, we'd like to thank the viewers first off. Thank you for providing some questions for us. This was definitely good food for thought. I hope that the answers were productive for you. Yeah. If you have any suggestions as to what you'd like to hear next time, we seem to be debating as to whether or not we want to do multiple topics or one large segment on one thing.
Yeah, where we really
give us your opinions. We want it to feed the viewer, of course, right? So let us know what you need. And that having been said, if you'd like to check this out, we are not only on YouTube, where you're watching us now. We're going to be putting this up on Twitch and other sites as well, so that there's a variety where you can view this.
Yeah, I don't know about Twitch, but we'll definitely be trying
we're going to put it in multiple
launch
places.
Our podcast on more audio podcast broadcasting sites. These are things that are going to come into the future. For now, we'll be working with YouTube. We did experience some technical difficulties. We're new to this, so I'm sure that we'll grow and get better as we continue to do this. That being said, we will be doing this every Sunday at 8 p.m. So if you want to tune in, you'll know when and where to find us.
All you got to